the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. Expert insights on buying and selling farmland in Western Canada.
Welcome back to the Farmland Exchange podcast. I'm Devon Davidson, your host and digital media strategist for CLHbid.com. On today's episode, we've got an exciting topic here, lots to dig into. We're going to talk about how we are different, the CLHbid.com difference between realtors and auctioneers. And to help us do that, we brought on our very own Director of Sales, Henry Vos. Henry, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for joining us. And also on the show, as always, Roy Carter, CEO of CLHbid.com. Roy, how are you?
Good. Thanks, Devon. Thanks, Henry.
Yeah, thanks for being here, guys. And also to our listeners, please make sure you take a minute to subscribe to the podcast on your platform of choice. And also, if you have some time, leave a 5-star review. It really helps us out with the algorithms. So, guys, should be a fun topic of conversation. Might want to start, Henry, by giving us a little bit of some background on yourself professionally. You spent some time as a realtor for 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, well, I'll back up a little bit further than that. We grain farmed in northern Alberta. We, as my wife and I, for more than 30 years. Actually, I think I have a certificate from the seed growers that says 35 years of seed production.
Okay.
So did that, and then we decided we didn't want to continue that. Our 2 daughters, we weren't sure quite what they wanted to do with their lives, and so we wound down our seed business and then our farm operation. Yep. And at that point in time, during that period, I had a chance to serve on many boards of directors, including the Canadian Wheat Board and the Winnipeg Commodity Exchange and various commodity organizations. So learned a lot about governance and representation of farmers and that sort of thing. So in this transition period then after farming, I decided I would take my real estate course and my real estate license. And then in my transition phase of life, decided, because I knew so many farmers around the country, thought I would practice as a realtor and see what I could do for farmers. So did that for about 5 years.
Okay. So, that helps for this conversation. Obviously, you're well-versed on both sides of the table, having understood how realtors work for farmers, and then also on our side as well. So on that, we're going to jump into CLHbid.com, a smarter way to sell farmland. And the first thing we wanted to talk about was exclusive representation and seller control. So I know that's something that we're big on, and Roy, I don't know if you want to tackle this first or Henry, but we're talking about solicitor-client privilege. So we only act for the seller, right?
Sure, I can take on the privilege part. Just going back to Henry, I actually bought seed from Henry. I sort of knew him before, but first time was in his yard with my grain truck picking up seed, and I'm sure that'd be over 30 years ago. Got a ton of respect for Henry and his horsepower and ag. Yep. And definitely was a standout agriculture realtor in northern Alberta as well. Going to privilege. So yeah, where we differ from realtors and auctioneers is the first phone call. We're bound by Solicitor-Client Privilege, which is a high standard by the Law Society. So clients are assured any communication is privileged, cannot be used against them and cannot be disclosed. And aside from, there's really 2 areas there to cover. They have privilege in that first phone call, plus we're bound by solicitor-client confidentiality. Mm-hmm. So anything that's discussed or anything that we learn about our client can never be disclosed, or we're sanctioned by the Law Society. So it's a high standard. And farm real estate is unique in that urban real estate, the vendor seldom knows the buyer. It'd be under 1% of cases. So it's not nearly as important, the confidentiality, as it is with farmland. I don't know what the number would be if Henry took a guess, but I would say, in 50% of cases, at least in agriculture, farm real estate, mm-hmm. the vendor will know the buyer, and sometimes really well. It might be a relative, a neighbor, the tenant. Mm-hmm. So, confidentiality becomes super important as far as if you want to negotiate, true top value. The more your buyer knows, the weaker you are as a seller in negotiating. And, in our experience in town, you can tell your listing realtor quite a bit. Often it gets to the other realtor who's actually acting for the other party, and then goes down the chain to the purchaser. In the case of ag real estate, that would be horrendous, because often it would be people in the know, a neighbor a mile or two away opens the door to collusion, etc.
So Henry, for you, and going back to exclusive representation, in your experience as a farm realtor, did you see situations where sellers assumed the agent was fully working for them, only to realize later that they weren't?
That's a complex question, and I would break it down into 3 parts, and then I'll get to why it's complex towards the end. First of all, there's the selling side. A client approaches a realtor to help them sell their property. Mm-hmm. Then there's the buying side. Somewhere out there's going to be a party interested in the property, maybe several. And generally in the real estate world, there's representation on both sides. Right. There's a selling agent and a buying agent. So that's the selling side. On the buying side, as I just mentioned, there's often, at least in urban real estate, there's often a realtor representing the buyer, separate and different from the seller side. The third part is before I get to the third part, so the seller wants to sell his property. The selling agent signs an agreement with him, and it's really a brokerage agreement where the seller signs off on the details of the property, the specific legal title, mm-hmm. Any conditions that he might have. For example, he might want to finish harvesting his crop or move grain out of the bins before the possession. So those things will be in this brokerage agreement that's signed. Then they sign another agreement, which is representation by this individual. And realtors are independent contractors. They're not employees. They're independent contractors. Basically work for themselves. Right. They're affiliated with a brokerage. The big names you'll see on the signs, but they're independent contractors. Very distinctly, they're independent contractors, and so they sign their own agreement that they'll represent the client. And most of these agreements, both the brokerage agreement and the agent agreement, somehow in there it says exclusive representation. Mm-hmm. And so, or that brokerage is exclusively going to sell the property. Nobody else is going to interfere with that sale. So that's the 2 parts that seller signs off on, thinking they've got representation for their interests. I just mentioned the buying side. Often, at least in typical real estate transactions in cities, there's a buying side realtor as well. So that's the buying side. In that brokerage agreement, there's a few lines in there that talk about what the seller is going to pay for commissions. Mm-hmm. The total commission rate for the property. There'll be another part of the agreement that has a statement about how that commission is going to be split. And typically what happens is the commission is split half between the selling realtor and half between the buying realtor. So that's the classic split. Commission rates are negotiable, but the split is fairly common at 50-50 or something close to that. So that gets to the third point in this, is the commissions. And I just mentioned how they get split. Mm-hmm. So if you think about typical practice in rural areas, there's not a lot of realtors in rural areas. The first thing the realtor does when he lists a property, and maybe it's on the way out of the driveway when they take the listing, is they pound in a sign. And guess whose phone number is on the sign? The listing realtor. Yep. So anybody that sees that property and then sees it later on in advertising will be phoning the seller's realtor to find out information. Mm-hmm. So this is all the neighbors. So the neighbors want to know what's going on, what's happening. And most likely fairly high in the list of potential candidates to buy the property. So right away, the realtor's in a bit of a conflict. Is he representing the seller or is he representing the buyer?
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you find happens in those cases? Like dueling, like conflicting interest, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. If you carry on, the buyer continues his conversation with the listing realtor, and may even get to the point of maybe they don't have a realtor. Farmers don't buy land every day. There's not a lot of people in an area that practice, so he continues on his conversation with the seller's realtor. Mm-hmm. Or the seller's agent, and can even get to the point of writing up an offer with the seller's agent.
Yeah.
So then the next thing that happens, the seller's agent has this offer, and he's got to take this offer back to his client, mm-hmm. and there's the conflict. Yeah. Is he representing the buyer or is he representing the seller? So the first piece of paper that comes out on the table when this offer comes to the table is an agreement that now says something to the effect that the realtor is no longer working for the seller. He's going to simply facilitate a transaction between the buyer and the seller. And essentially, the seller's on his own and the buyer's on his own. Obviously, the realtor's going to do whatever he can to make the deal happen, mm-hmm. because he gets all the commissions. That's right. On both sides of the transaction. And I think if you think about the logic of it, they got to get that agreement signed that they're no longer representing their client, mm-hmm. the fellow that thought they were going to be exclusive to them, before they can present the offer. Otherwise, it is officially a conflict of interest. So right. It's a really tricky position. It's difficult. And the seller that thought he had exclusive representation all of a sudden find themselves without any.
Well, and now that selling agent, he's in his best interest, he wants to make sure that first offer gets signed so he gets his commission, right? He's not concerned about price discovery.
Well, no question, the pressure's on. There's an offer there, and the agent is, suggesting to the seller that here's an offer, and then whatever the differences are between the numbers or the details, they're generally working on the seller to reduce their expectations, and they're working on the buyer to increase their offer. Back and forth between the two to try and complete the deal. So it's very significant pressure at that point. Neither one having official representation at that point.
So that goes to another big difference with CLHbid.com, right? Eliminating that duplication of listing and selling agents, right? And just ensuring that there's no conflict of interest.
Right. Yeah, totally. Exactly what Henry talks about. I mean, they have an offer, even if they got another offer from a selling realtor, a different realtor, they know they're going to get double commission if this one gets signed that they're on both sides on, right? Mm-hmm. We had just last week, we had a call from a pending seller and got talking to her, and we got talking about options and real estate, and she said, yeah, I know the drill on that. And I said, you guys sold some land by real estate? And she said, no, we were realtors, my husband and I. And she said, it's sad to say, but, the drill was kind of overpromise, get the listing. And then basically an offer comes in, and then you go with the story that this might be it. You better take it. And, we're not definitely, somebody like Henry, there's lots of good realtors out there, lots of ethical realtors, but there's a tendency because of money to sometimes that goes on. Does it go on? Totally. Yeah. And, this lady, they'd actually been in business themselves and got it and said it doesn't work, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So just going back to duplication of agents here, Henry, in the U.S., they're changing that, right? Or it's already been changed. Do you think Canada follows suit?
Well, I read the information on the U.S., and both sellers and buyers have to have their own representation. That is now the case in British Columbia as well.
Okay.
except for rural areas. Recognizing the challenge with finding people to represent both sides, I think, but certainly an indication of the challenge of this situation of realtors being caught in the middle and challenged to make the deal, but motivated by the fact that there's commissions to be had. So always working, and certainly I think everybody attempts to work within the rules, but it's a really a conflicting situation for people. Mm-hmm. So I think it's likely to continue getting more attention in Canada. I hear it talked about in various magazines that I see. Obviously, I watch this topic closely.
Yeah.
But BC is the first province that I know of that has switched to having agents on both sides again, except for rural areas.
That's good to see. The next thing we want to talk about here, Roy, was we set the terms of the offer, right? Not the buyer. So we control the terms and the narrative, and we keep the sellers in control. And as you said, I think Henry's, we exclusively represent the seller. That's important to us, right? How much influence does the buyer in traditional real estate have in shopping the terms of the sale, Roy?
Well, they drive the bus. In conventional real estate, they draft the terms of the offer. They put the conditions in, everything, and then the vendor, all they do is they're always responding, right? And if they're doing a counter, I've seen cases where an offer comes in and the farmer says, it doesn't work for me. And the other realtor calls and says, well, aren't you going to counter? And it was like, no. And it's like, well, you got to counter. And it's like, no, you don't have to counter, right? There's no such law that you got to counter it. He can say, I don't like it.
Yeah.
And if you decide to send one I like, maybe I'll read it. But they're in this system where it's just once you get in the game, they just expect, here's an offer, be countered back and forth a couple times, and it'll get over the line, sometimes with a nominal deposit. There's this misnomer, too, that, well, let's not ask for too big of a deposit because it might be onerous and it might not get signed. Mm-hmm. We require 20% within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And there's a big buffer because of this list selling situation where on the owner's side, he never gets direct information from that buyer. You're getting it fed from the purchaser to his agent, to your agent, and then, there's about 3 people in there. So what really happens, right? And in our situation at CLH Law, we have direct drive. Mm-hmm. We can deal. We only act for sellers, but the buyer's got to deal with us. There's nobody in between. And a couple weeks ago we had a sale, and the guy called, and I was out, come back to the office, and the receptionist said, so and so was high on that sale, but he wants to talk to you because he can't close. So I said, put it through. So. The call comes through, and they know we're a law firm. Where yeah. I think they kind of wonder, what we might do or whatever. Anyway, I said hi, and he said, "Yeah, I was a bidder on that sale." And I said, "No, you weren't." And he said, "Yeah, no, I was." And I said, "No, you were the buyer." And there's a difference. And he said, "Well, I don't have the money." And I said, "Well, you're not going to have a very good summer, right?" And that's what's going to happen. And so we're talking, put that in the context of, ask that other agent what his buyer said. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to hold that guy's feet to the fire, way tougher, right? You don't have direct access to him, right?
Yeah.
I could hear on the guy on the other end of the phone, right? I think he was going to go find his money, right?
Yeah.
And so from that point of view, direct drive, nobody between start to finish. I think makes a big difference in the end as far as delivering for your client. Why should these guys control an offer when it's your land?
Yeah.
Maybe your grandfather homesteaded it. Should be able to you to set the terms. So we, our vendor will say, I don't want to move off until a certain date. I want to be able to sell my equipment a bit later. Mm-hmm. Does that work? And it's like, you own it. That'll all be factored into the price, but you can set your terms. And again, even from a tax point of view, aside from the capital gains exemption, they have primary residence. So you can allocate, or it has to be reasonable, but you don't need to get in that fight later. It can be allocated in the offer. That's it. So under CLHbid, they bid both price and the terms of the offer, which cannot be changed. So we give the seller a way more control. Yeah.
Right. And certainty. So that's, we've talked about no conditional offers. That's another thing we want to get into here is we don't mess around with that. There's no, right? It's just the seller sets the terms and now there's peace of mind for the seller, right?
Yeah. Often it's a case of, as Henry knows, they want to buy in town. They want to make a commitment on an urban residence or move. They need to know dates, and tax is such a big deal on the farm exit. When you don't have a set date, don't spend money with your tax planner, because that changes, as we know. And so, if you can have a set date, you can deal with the tax and, minimize your net tax as well, right?
Yeah. And Henry, for you, just in your experience as a farm realtor, what sort of conditions did you see on sales, and how did that put the sellers at a disadvantage?
Yeah, I think Roy should tell our listeners what a condition is, because a lot of people are not sure about the word when they hear it in terms of the real estate context. But essentially, I call it an out clause. Whoever sets a condition has the privilege of getting out if that condition is not met or waived. And I was just party to a discussion about a commercial transaction here last week. And the question was, well, they're going to do this on this side. What do we have for out clauses on our side? And it was, we have lots of out clauses. So if a buyer can write in a number of conditions, out clauses, and the classic one is financing. The buyer's got to go off and see if they can get financing.
Yeah. So
they'll make an offer on a property. They give 30 days or even 6 weeks to achieve financing. And then the seller signs off on that. Essentially what it does is it takes the property off the market for that period of time. In the meantime, the buyer may have the money in the bank. The buyer may need financing and can get financing without any problem. But decide that the financing or the use of the funds that they have available have a different purpose, or for some reason they have decided that the financing available does not suit the sale as they're looking at, and move on. In the meantime, the seller's sitting there for a month or more waiting for conditions. So that's a condition that's often. There's other ones, about sewer systems and all that sort of thing, checking that out. But that's a classic one. What it does, though, for the seller, though, is it leaves them in the air.
Yeah.
They can't make any plans. Their hands are tied. The property's essentially off the market for that period of time. Neighbors all think it's sold, but maybe it isn't really sold. So it can be a real challenge for sellers. And so, as Roy mentioned, we set the terms with the seller at CLHbid, and things are very defined. The buyer, the buyer's bidding on for the price and for the set terms.
Yeah.
Like Henry says, park. They park the vendor for their 6-week conditional period or whatever. He could get other cash offers even better in that period. Can't touch them. They go elsewhere. The guy uses the out clause, and then he's stuck with the land type deal, right?
Yeah.
You've seen it happen.
The other thing we want to talk about was we must pass on what we know, right? And Roy, is that part of solicitor-client privilege?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it should be, the level should be the same for real estate. I'm sure a lot of realtors are super honorable. They will pass it on. We don't have an option. Anything we know, our client's entitled to know. Mm-hmm. So, if we get any information, whether or not it may not be beneficial to CLHbid,
right,
we don't have an option to sift through that and say, we wished our client didn't know this. Our client, we stand in their shoes and they need to know everything, so everything's passed on.
Right.
Which there's absolute total transparency, and it makes for a lot stronger and a better relationship.
Yeah,
in the
agreed.
end.
So, Henry, on the flip side of that, have you seen in traditional real estate where information was selectively disclosed and it negatively influenced a deal for a seller? And do you have any examples you could share?
The approach that in a couple of ways, and one of the parts of the real estate training that I took was about the necessary disclosures in real estate, and there's laws about this, and I'm sure Roy can explain them way better than I can. But one that I recall very clearly was related to material latent defects on a property, and I put those into the category of things that might hurt or kill somebody. These are serious things, and I'll give you an example. There's an old well with a pump jack on it in the back. It's kind of fallen in, and the grass is growing over it. If you know about that, you are required to disclose those kind of things because they're affect people's lives.
For sure, yeah.
Absolutely. Other things, though, the shingles are curling up on the roof. The seller might say, yeah, I got to change the shingles in a couple of years or something. I don't know for sure. You don't have to disclose that. It's a buyer beware. If the buyer can't see the shingles are curling up, then perhaps the buyer should get some help with their side of it. But if all of a sudden the realtor is representing both sides or essentially representing himself and nobody, it's not necessary they disclose that.
No.
But they're in the middle of the transaction, so you can see the incentive is to leave that be, not create any barrier to the transaction. So those kind of things are, I think in terms of honorable people doing the right thing. There's lots of examples of good people doing that, and the defects, material latent defects. Everybody's got to disclose those. If the seller disclosed to the realtor when they had an exclusive arrangement that the lowest price they could accept on this property was X, then the realtor should not be disclosing that to the buyer that comes to the table later. And that because they signed that agreement that it was going to be exclusive, they were going to be exclusive agent. But you can't help but think that if the buyer says, well, where do I need to be on this to get this property? Yeah. There's going to be, well, if you're somewhere around this number,
maybe the agent might
work.
Yeah.
So it gets to quite a conflict of what you disclose.
Okay. Next topic here, guys, is due diligence and maximizing land value. So, Roy, you said it many times, but one thing we do is we drill down on title and registrations in advance, and issues are resolved before the sale, reducing risks for sellers and buyers. What kind of title registration issues have you seen derail a farmland sale, and how does CLHbid.com prevent those issues from becoming a problem?
Yeah, we drill down as a law firm. We're used to it. Before we started CLHbid 9-10 years ago, we would sometimes get offers in our office where the land had actually not been searched by the realtor. They'd just put the legal in, and you search it as a law firm, and it was like, did you know about this? And I was like, no. Do you never search that title? No. So, we drill down, and for a couple of reasons. One is we want to make sure we can sell what we've been asked to, and we don't look like idiots. And the other one is we want to make sure our vendor keeps his money, that there's no surprises and no issues down the road, and they don't get sued over it. But, there'll be a common one, and know what you don't know is a bit of an issue. And again, not all realtors are like this, but I've asked, is there access to a realtor? Right. And it's like, yeah, there's a road there. It's not that good, but maybe it's not all weather, but it's a road. And it's like, no, is there legal access? No, it's there. You might get stuck on it. And it's like, no, I'm talking about something different. Yeah. I know there's a road there. But is it a road plan, or how do they get there, right? And you'd be surprised the number that don't know the difference.
Right.
And you'd be surprised sometimes about the amount of land that doesn't actually have legal access. Another good example sometimes is some quarters can't be sold alone. They're tied to another quarter, and that varies from province to province. But, you'll see an offer for a quarter, and it's like, yeah, no, you actually can't sell this as one quarter. It's tied to another legal, right? So from that point of view, we'll drill down on all that to make sure this can be sold, no subdivision required. The SLR, surface lease revenue. We have staff that deal with our client, and we need to know if you've ever got notice to abandon a well, any notices need to be passed on, right? We're not interested in playing games, not interested in a purchaser saying, they said they wrote to your guy 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago. So from that point of view, we have staff that works just to flush it out. And you can solve some of those problems. Maybe, if there's no legal access, maybe an easement works and we can do a legal easement. But we definitely shake the bushes rather than sort of ignore the bush and, just hope. And there's that saying, hope's not a good strategy. And so we don't take that route.
Just for anyone that's listening, Roy, maybe do you want to talk about the differences between legal and physical access?
Yeah, totally. Legal access could mean you can't see a road, but you're entitled to go over it. It's public.
Yeah.
But, maybe there's no tracks down it, and there might even be bush on it.
Right.
But then there's also old roads out there, and often they're, oil company roads or whatever that are used, but they could be put to bed, abandoned, and they don't give any purchaser the long-term right to use it.
Right.
So the fact that you see a road there doesn't mean there's guaranteed access for a purchaser down the road.
Okay. And Henry, for you, how often do buyers assume that they have legal access to a piece of farmland, only to find out later they didn't?
Well, interesting question. And I'm glad you sent me some of these questions beforehand because I made a few notes here.
Well, that's perfect. Yeah,
appreciate that. I think when it gets to that stage, most of the challenges have been worked out.
Sure.
When a buyer has signed the papers and has a title in their hand, most of the challenges have been worked out. But occasionally I've seen it. Hasn't happened to me, and I'm pretty during the time I was pretty diligent at digging out titles because there was quite a bit of information on them that was important prior to going and signing a listing. But occasionally it's happened where the sign goes up at the end of the driveway and the tenant comes over and says, "Oh, I got another 10 years on that agreement," or my 10-year agreement's not finished yet. I have another 2 years.
Sure.
And so then it's up to the owner and the tenant to resolve that in some way. As when I was practicing as a realtor, I tried to stay out of all of the legal issues, and I would refer things to the tenant's legal counsel. I said, you need to hire yourself a lawyer on this one because I'm not in a position to help you. I'm not a lawyer, and realtors aren't. They're not allowed to give legal advice on anything. Yeah. So I think most realtors follow that. But there's some interesting stories out there. I had a client ask me to come look at some property. Quarter section, I can sell it. I want to take an acreage off of it, then sell the rest. And so I pulled the title on it. And there's one line on the back page after the power line right away and the gas line right away, and it said, and I don't know if I even got the words right because I haven't heard anybody use them, lease pendens. And it was registered about 30 years previous to the date that I looked at this property. So, and I said, "What's this all about?" He didn't know. He had to go and check with his lawyer. And maybe Roy, you can tell us what that word means.
Yeah, somebody else is making a claim. Normally, it's an ex-spouse. But yeah, we had one a while ago here where it was an ex-spouse that had died, and had been on there for like 40 years, right? So then you need a court order to get that off, but it may still be a pending action. So it's basically just notice to the world that somebody else is making a legal claim on that. So if you see that on there, obviously you can't sell until it gets cleared up.
Yeah.
In this particular case, Grandpa's will hadn't been settled.
Oh.
And Grandpa had given his son a life estate on the property. And now the son had passed away, and the grandson was trying to sell the property.
Okay.
Oh.
And so the whole family had to agree to some resolution to Grandpa's will from 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Roy, this is another example where the expertise at CLH, just as a law firm, can assist with that, right? I mean, there's all sorts of family dynamics to deal with around the legalities of it, right?
Yeah, and definitely, nothing better than a senior paralegal. Most in my experience know more than a lawyer about land and registrations and that. So we have a team of that go through it. They're much more diligent than most lawyers too. On your access deal, Henry and I years ago had a common Monsanto rep. And I still recall him, he called me, Doug was his first name. And he was told he could buy this quarter, and it had no physical access, but it had legal access. There was a road allowance to it. But he was told, then just call the county or RM afterwards and get your road built, right? And he called me, and it was like, who do I call to get the road built, right? And it was like, not happening, right? To my knowledge, there's not one in Western Canada that you can force to build you a road. Wow. And he said, well, I was told there's a road allowance there and they got to build you a road. And it's like, no. So he later resold that quarter, but yeah.
And his potential buyers were very limited, as in the neighbor.
Yeah, no, exactly. Totally, yeah.
All right, the next one we want to move on to is packaging. We've talked lots about this, Roy, in previous episodes. I think, Henry, we talked with you maybe on your last episode about packaging at some point. But it's intended to maximize value. And we actually had this conversation with Ali earlier. It was just how important that is. So maybe, Roy, just press upon our listeners, like, how does that impact value when you're packaging things properly?
Yeah, it's huge. And where we saw it, it was common with real estate to say, here, this farm's for sale at Russell, Manitoba. There's 12 quarters or whatever. And the reason it was done that way is that farmer, it didn't want to be left with one rubber boot. He had equipment for 12. He didn't want to sell 6 and be stuck with the other 6 and have too much equipment. So it was problematic. And so it was always packaged together. But what we saw is, for every person with money to buy those 12, there's 10 to buy one of those quarters, 10 people to buy one. There's multiples. Right. And often they'll pay a premium for the one across the fence. Mm-hmm. And, as you know, in Saskatoon, if you had 10 houses, you would never say, I'm only selling to one buyer. Nobody would do it. Yeah. And we always use the stupid analogy, if you had a Dodge Ram truck with a Harley in the back and a livestock trailer with a goat and a roping horse in it, you probably wouldn't sell it as one package. Mm-hmm. Somebody wants the Harley and somebody wants the goat, but you can always leave it there at the end and have a second round in case somebody does. Yeah. So that's really what we focused on when we set out to build CLHbid 10, 11 years ago. We looked at systems around the world, how to maximize. And we knew if we ruled out the smaller buyer that would pay a premium, we were just going to hand it to the big guys at a discount, which didn't seem fair. So basically, we come up with a two-round system. We'll look at packaging seriously as to how it's farmed. Is it a half? Is it a quarter? Whatever. And then we'll put it in different parcels. But if it's 20 quarters, it may get sold as 11 or 12 parcels. Right. But at the end, we have another round called our on-block round, where as long as you bid high, met certain parameters, and are willing to pay a premium, we let you bid into another round. So then you can deliver a value for assemblage, right? And which nobody can put a value on in advance. Mm-hmm. Where people, for a big assemblage, what they'll pay, that's a wild guess, but it can be a big amount in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And then, Henry, for you, did you ever see sellers leave money on the table based on how their property was packaged, or maybe it was 40 quarters they were trying to sell and there wasn't enough demand or interest?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because you never know precisely what could have been. You know, you got a deal that's done,
For sure.
and you don't know, what it might have been. But one of the things I've seen, and I actually saw this at an auction sale, 2 quarters across the road from each other, 1 quarter wide open from end to end, cultivated 155 acres out of the quarter. The other side of the road, there was a yard site. Again, good quarter, a couple of big bins. House, the shingles were curled up on the edge,
Sure.
and doors were coming off a couple of the shops, but there's probably 15,000 bushels of storage in the yard. I think maybe 20 acres taken out for the yard site. The quarter with the yard sold for less than the open quarter.
Yeah.
And so, Roy talks about a rubber boot, but sometimes we're talking about home quarters.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of attachment to home quarters. Most people would love to see their farm go to a young farmer starting out and the whole package and take it. But let's face it, young farmers that they just can't get the financing for that type of purchase. So, what happens when an agent lists a property is that they'll list the whole property for X number. Very seldom is it split out by the quarter because the condition of that they sign with the realtor is that nothing sells until the home quarter sells, and so then you wind up dealing with the big guys, that can buy the whole place, or maybe 2 people that get along, a father and a son or something. And then the place gets discounted to the point where it works for this big operation and maybe a son that's coming in to take it. So you don't necessarily know what it might have sold as, but it's sold as a package, but not necessarily available to the neighbors at their individual premium on each quarter.
Right.
So you wind up somewhat discounted from what it could have sold for, but it's selling as a package with that home place, and so I think at times they get discounted in that respect. That's CLHbid's got some great experience in terms of subdividing yards, subdividing quarters, changing property lines in order to meet up the needs of one buyer versus another buyer. At the end of a sale, you might have the yard go to somebody that just wants an acreage out of town. You might have some land over the hill that goes to a recreation person. And then all the rest goes to the farmers in the area. So those are the kinds of things that I've seen happen at CLHbid that are very rare with realtors.
It's unique for sure.
We appreciate that, Henry. And you're a big part of the team at CLHbid. What we do at the start is drill down there too, and if we think there's 2 buyers, like if you're selling 2 different things, we go to that subdivision, investigate that, talk to them about that. Sometimes there needs to be a property realignment like Henry talks about. And we always say anybody can sell land. It's another one to maximize value. And that means starting, how do we package, and do we have to change some titles like the subdivision route?
Yeah. Well, this feels like a good place to jump into price discovery then. So our online tender, that lets the market set the price rather than guessing at a list price. Roy, how does our online tender platform provide true price discovery for sellers?
Yeah, I mean, so we're escalating tender. It's escalating legal tender. When we got into the space as a law firm, I had taken quite a few clients in the past to auction because I believed in price discovery, and I saw the problems with list. But then once I took enough to auction, I also saw the inherent difficulties there. But list, most people see it as just a wild guess. Somebody's put a number on that, and they assume it's overlisted, and they wait for it to drop. Where we find, if you can give them confidence, the value's there, and that means when they're out tendered, they have a right to go back. They get 100% confidence when they're out tendered that somebody else is willing to pay it. It's probably not coming up again. I'm going to go back. And, that's been a game changer. We've taken land, that was, in one example, appraised at $843,000. If you would have listed it for $1 million, probably doesn't sell. It sold for $1.88 million on our site. And it was competing farmers. But they stayed on it. They had 100% confidence that the value was there. And I think I mentioned it maybe in another podcast, but we had another case of a court-ordered sale. It was listed for $500,000 by the court, and then not sold, not an offer on it. And the court came to us with the lawyers and said, "We see you guys do this as a law firm," and we took it on our site. It sold for $1 million, or double what it had been listed at without an offer. And we called the purchaser, and it was like, "What the hell's that about?" Like, "Why didn't you buy that for half?" And it's like, "Yeah, I'm good. I thought I was waiting for the listing to drop. They normally drop, and then you guys got the damn thing, right?" And he said, "I'm good. I knew somebody else is willing to pay $990. I got it." It was right next to him. Yeah. So it is mind-boggling, but if you just need to give people the confidence,
right? And
they don't get it with a list price, right?
So Henry, for you, drawing on your experience again as a farm realtor, how often did you see the for sale sign rot off the fence post without a single offer?
Well, none of my signs did.
They were treated. or maybe someone you knew.
He had him pressure treated.
The first offer that comes in is an important offer, and if you miss the interested parties right at the start, in other words, you can't come to an agreement, property can sit for a while.
Yeah.
And as Roy just alluded to, the neighbors all think it's going to come down. They're waiting for the big reduced sign stuck on top of the realtor sign. Yeah. And so that's a challenge. And it's hard on people that are expecting a sale. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. I think we've already touched on this, guys, was set exit date. So unlike listings, we do have that certainty, right? So you can help with estate planning. Henry, we chatted with you previously about transition planning. How does knowing the firm exit date change the mindset of a seller compared to waiting indefinitely?
It's a game changer for lots of people. Knowing with relative certainty that they're going to be able to move on with their life on a certain date is huge. Yeah. Making the decision to sell is difficult, and we talked about that in the last podcast I was involved with. Decision to sell the farm. When you make that decision, you want to move on. And you want to move on quickly, and sometimes, CLHbid gives that certainty. Some of the other options don't, and it's really important for most sellers.
Roy, just quick from your perspective, how many clients or sellers have you had say to you, that was really important to me that you guys did that?
Oh yeah, many. They're planning their life around it.
Yeah. And
again, because we're a law firm, there's a set exit date. They know they're going to get funds. So they can do interim financing. So as a law firm, we'll do an assignment of sale proceeds. Mm-hmm. So the proceeds we control, the vendor doesn't. They go to the other purchaser's lawyer. So they can piggyback purchases. So they can totally plan. It's not like they got to go live with their kids for 6 months after the sale. Mm-hmm. They can actually totally piggyback those two transactions, and they like it. Their ability to facilitate financing with interim financing is huge.
Let's talk about the difference in that we're not regional. So I know that's a big one, Roy, and we market land across Western Canada. It's critical as farmers are looking to buy beyond just their locales. With how important is that? I screwed this question, guys. Sorry. With farmers expanding beyond their local areas, how does CLHbid.com that Western Canadian reach benefit sellers?
I'll maybe let Henry talk on it afterwards too, but it's not only farmers expanding their reach, but sometimes they're setting up a son or a daughter that's getting married in another area, Western Canada, where the economics work, whether it be for cattle or grain, or maybe it's too heated in their area. Maybe they're in the Bow Island area where there's pivots and they got to move them someplace else. Mm-hmm. So, over the years, CLHbid, we've kind of become a clearinghouse of real estate across Western Canada. I don't know if you've ever tried to look for a listing on realestate.ca or whatever it is, but they're impossible to find, right? And, unlike auction houses, we don't sell lawnmowers or, weed eaters or whatever. They go to our site and they can see it across Western Canada, right?
Yeah.
And they like it. And people will move. There's no such thing as a Saskatchewan-Alberta border, Manitoba.
Yeah.
They want farmland. And so, in some of our last sales in 2024, was Albertans buying in Manitoba, and Manitoba's buying in Albertan. They'll go all over.
Yeah.
Real estate is regional quite often for two reasons. One is licensing, and the other one is marketing, in my mind, because to not be regional is expensive. And but we think our whole goal is to bring value. And you'll see real estate offices. A lot of them don't know what we do for sure, and they tend not to call us. But some will come after us on fees and say, "Well, we're cheaper."
Right.
And there's that old saying that price is a determining factor in the absence of value, right?
Totally.
So to go market across Western Canada is a game changer for investors to get people on. You'll get a couple at Strom with Strom, Alberta, with some kids that want to get into cattle, and maybe Manitoba's the only place. That works from that point of view. So I would say the fact that we're not regional, total game changer as far as wringing out the sponge. Henry?
I was thinking about value there, and we used to sell pedigreed seed oats. And they were pretty pricey, and some people complained about the price. But I always said, well, if you want the ones that have been through the horse once, they're a little cheaper.
Oh, okay.
The market for farmland is fairly transparent across Canada on a platform like CLHbid. People can look back on the history of the sales. They're all online there. I can find out what things sold for. FCC's got good information on farmland values in the province and how things have appreciated over the years. I've known farmers that have farmed in southern Alberta, moved to northern Alberta, and then moved to Saskatchewan because of the economics, and each time increased the size of their farms. So, the website that's used to market properties, I have written to the organization a number of times in the past, suggesting that they should split rural properties from the residential properties and from the commercial properties.
Yeah.
And had absolutely no uptake on it. I was licensed as a rural realtor. In other words, I sold farmland.
Yeah.
So the question became, what is a farm? And so here's the complication. Can I sell an acreage?
Right.
Because the guy wants to raise a few horses on it. And so, but the same issue is on the website. You have a choice of commercial or residential. So is a farm an acreage commercial operation, or is it a residential operation?
Right.
Answer me that question.
You tell me.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Exactly.
So, anyways, there's things that can be done there. But that gets to the next question you got written down for me about marketing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it's a really nice segue, right? So we're talking about marketing and what we do to maximize exposure and to maximize value. In traditional real estate, Henry, how much effort is actually put into the marketing process, and how does it differ with what we do here at CLHbid? Because I know that we pride ourselves on what we do in terms of marketing, right? And you've called it world-class many times.
Yeah. The best way I can describe the difference between a traditional real estate agent and their marketing program and CLHbid is they are complete opposites. The realtor, pick me for example, their objective is to maximize their commissions, and to do that they want to minimize their expenses. Now realtors, agents are in charge of their own advertising of properties, so they pay the bills for advertising the properties. So the classic example to get the maximum commission is minimize the advertising costs. So what do you do first? You phone all the neighbors. perhaps before you get back to the office after you got the listing. And if you can make a deal with one of those people before you get back to the office, you have no advertising expenses and all the commissions. So the opposite of that is that when a client signs up with CLHbid, this world-class marketing, and I'm absolutely adamant about that, it is world-class, no question about it. The full marketing team goes to work, puts together a full program on the property, does all of the social media, the videography, all of the details, and I can't even describe all of them because there's lots of them. Well, you're part of it, so you know more than I do.
There's a team of us, and actually, for anyone that's interested, we do have another episode where Mike and I and Roy actually really dove into some of those topics, and because there is a lot that goes into it, and there's a workflow that happens the second that we have a sale on the site. A, B, C, D, E, F, G happens, right? And it takes a team to make it work.
Yeah. So you can see the opposite nature of these two types of marketing programs. Full blast team effort, right to the nth degree. Minimum as possible to get the sale. Okay, well, I didn't get the sale on the first few phone calls. Well, I guess I got to put an ad in the paper. And then
try and amp it up a little bit.
Yeah, the advertising moves up, and then you move more extensively across the country into national papers and things if you don't get the local community. So they're completely opposite.
Yeah. Roy, I'd like your perspective on that too. What have you seen in your time, just the last 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it varies in other countries. I think Canada lags behind. I think the whole 50% to get the listing is broke. I think it should be skewed to the seller, but then how do you get it marketed again? But the marketing is often chosen on, it's my wife's cousin, or I went to school with him, or I did this, right? Yeah. And you really need two things to sell real estate to maximize value. You need the right team and the right platform. And Henry and I have both flown. Henry still flies. But I always look at it, your buddy you went to school with standing out there by his old airplane that, when he starts it up, it's there's blue smoke coming out, and he says it's burning a bit of oil, whatever, and you want to go to Vancouver. You jump in with somebody with maybe a substandard airplane, or the guy standing next in his pilot suit, maybe two of them, two up front, with a twin and a nice looking airplane, right? I might get in that one, right?
Yeah.
And but there's a tendency sometimes to go with the cousin of a cousin, or and the whole deal's broke in my mind. And I don't know if that analogy makes any sense, but you're probably better going with somebody that you didn't go to school with, that does it full time, and has got the right platform. Yeah.
Yeah, producer Mike and I got into this conversation about nepotism the other day, and it's like that's not always the best decision, right? You need to select people based on merit, and the way you market your property should be based on merit as well. Okay, we also wanted to mention serious buyers only. So CLH, and Roy already mentioned this, but CLH requires a 20% deposit, right, ensuring that there's buyer commitment. How do we differ in our deposit policy from traditional real estate? Maybe Henry, you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, I could. I actually have a personal story about that. My view now is that deposits need to be significant, and they need to be a deterrent to skipping out on a sale. My wife and I built a house along the river, and this was in 2008, the height of the financial crisis. There was all kinds of contractors, and prices were decent for building. Beautiful house, just a few miles out of town, and look over you had to stand up to see the edge of the river from the windows. It was right down below us. At that time, I wasn't a realtor, and I didn't sell houses anyways, but we hired a realtor and got an offer on this property. And the realtor convinced us that a $5,000 deposit was, adequate, and hadn't had any experience with it being an issue. So we packed up moved out of the house, and the day before the closing, the buyers decided they wanted to have another look. And so here's my wife and I looking at each other going, is there a problem with this sale?
Yeah, that doesn't sound
Are
good.
they going to walk away from $5,000? Well, if you think about it, though, $5,000 on a $700,000 house is not very much, and easily could have happened. So I got a very personal lesson that deposits need to be significant. We'd spent more on moving our stuff out and getting ready than that deposit would have covered.
Roy, any stories from your side, deposit horror stories you've seen? Just
Yeah, us versus auction, I've definitely had clients go to auction and big auction houses over the years. And if the buyer doesn't come through, it's like, come and pick up your 10 lowboys, right?
yeah.
And it's like, what? And I had one client, the market was pretty hot. It was a numbered company that was clearly on a flip. They didn't come through, picked up all his equipment, and then the oil patch went south and took a big, big hit on it, right? So, when we built CLHbid, it's like we're really a function of what didn't work in real estate auction. And it gets easier to build something when you know what doesn't work. So we have privity of contract with these buyers as well, not just the seller who accepts that tender, but when they register with us, we're under contract, they're under contract to us,
Right.
too, that you're going to get sued if you don't come up with that deposit and close, because it's going to hurt our credibility. Because we've all seen, whether it's a ring man at the front with the old flip phone, and you wonder if he's really on, or, people getting called that they were second, but the first guy doesn't want to close. We never want to make that call. If that happens, they're going to think the first guy was you, right? The house, right?
Right.
So again, we have big, our minimum penalty is $100,000, even on a small deal, and then it goes up from there. It's a percentage directly to the bidder if they don't come up with a deposit, right? So again, it keeps people a lot more honest if they know they're looking at getting sued by both the seller and us, right?
Roy, do you want to maybe talk about how we're able to facilitate real estate transactions, the Real Estate Act, and do you see the real estate industry trying to make changes in response to the disruption CLHbid.com has kind of put across Western Canada?
We just sold some land in central Alberta where the guy called and said, take it. And we got talking, and I said, where'd you get our name? And he said, my sister's a realtor in our hometown. And she said, farmland should go to you guys.
Wow.
So, you're getting realtors that aren't just afraid of the disruption and fear us and want us to go away. It's like, okay, this is coming, and we got to make some changes, or maybe we work with them or whatever.
Sellers look for expertise. Selling real estate is not the average person's normal course of business or even knowledge. And so they hire someone to help them with that knowledge, with the terminology, with the details, with the timelines and all of those sorts of things. And so people attempt to fill these roles the best they can. But these conflicts occur when especially in rural areas and farmland. And so a system like CLHbid just takes that all away. We work for the sellers. We make it very convenient for buyers to buy. Buyers know upfront what all's involved. And so it's very straightforward. And that's why I kept bugging Roy to see if he would have me help out a little bit or get in the way. Maybe that would be a better thing.
Didn't have to bug us too much. Serious horsepower.
No, we were lucky that you were so persistent. Well, so with that, Henry, I think is it fair to say that some of that conflict is due to the compensation side of things, and is there or are there better models for compensation?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't engineered a better model. I think CLHbid is pretty straightforward. It's obviously filled a need with the size of the market they've achieved in Western Canada. It is fairly straightforward for sellers. The compensation model where you have the seller paying for the agents acting on both sides seems a little off. The buyer essentially should be paying for their own hired help. And the seller, now there may be examples out there where you can list a property, but the seller's got to pay all the advertising costs, and then the buyer's got to pay their own person. I'm not aware of those, but there's probably that's probably been approached. This has been the traditional model in the real estate world. So I'm struggling to say that I know there's a better system other than CLHbid. This one works.
Okay. So Roy, we've covered a few different things here, but I want to talk about, realtors will claim that they're often cheaper, but is that actually the case? Because once you consider that the additional services that CLHbid offers, the marketing side of it, potentially there's hidden fees or things that the clients aren't aware of, things can stack up fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think they're cheaper. It's easy to be cheap. The whole deal's about what you net in the end. I've seen some advertised where, for a fee that is way less than our marketing expense. Mm-hmm. But we do know how to market, and we know how to maximize value, and we know what that has brought in a lot of cases. So, and we're turnkey, no extras, no front load. Basically it's listing, selling, legal, everything all in, and it's a set fee. I think if you ask prior sellers, a lot would say we're actually no net fee at all. It's a function of how much more you get in the end with true price discovery and true marketing. I think, just on the face of it, you'll see ads now where some of them keep dropping monthly almost. I don't think their business is going up, and I think people read through that. It's a case of it's a big deal selling the farm, and they want, just like we talked about, maybe the right team with the right airplane or the right platform, and they're willing to pay for it, right?
Let's keep it to agriculture. Do you want the good, high quality oats that grow, or do you want the ones that have been through the horse?
Okay, that's better. Yeah, I get it better.
It's a good example. Okay. There you go. So I guess kind of in a similar vein, Henry, sometimes we've talked about this a little bit, is realtors will overpromise to get listings, right? Sellers are often misled about expected sales prices just to sign a contract. And do you think sellers are often given unrealistic expectations in terms of final sale price or the number of potential bidders that they can line up for their sale?
Yeah, I can't speak for other agents, but my approach was always to present the sellers with as much information as I could find on comparable sales, where I thought the market was going, what the financial situation was of farmers in the area. Mm-hmm. In other words, their capacity to buy. For me, there was always a balance. There was always a balance of, if you overpromise, how are you going to deliver on that? On the other side, if you tried to present them with a low number, maybe the low end of the range so that you could execute a sale quickly, neither one of those did you good in the long term.
Right.
And so, CLHbid, we allow the buyers to decide what that number is. As a realtor, though, you got to put your flag in the sand and say, well, I think this would be the number. But to me, it was always a balance, trying to find that sweet spot that you thought that might be achieved in the market, and then, you maybe take the top end of that, understanding that bids would come in below that number. So, there's another part to this as well, and I got to tell you this story because I think I've shared part of it with Roy, but often farmers will ask you, or executors or people that own land that's come down through the generations, what it's worth. Mm-hmm. What's it worth? How much is it worth? As a realtor, we could not give appraisals on land. That's a designated profession. Mm-hmm. It's you got to be a certified land appraiser to provide an appraisal. Right. That's the words used in that field. And so we could provide an opinion of value. That's what a realtor could do, an opinion of value. And so my approach was always to provide a range. Here's where I think the high would be. Here's where I think the low would be. And this happened right about the time that I was bugging you a little harder about coming to work with CLHbid. And a client, a potential client, a person I wanted to be a client, had asked me for an opinion of value on property. And the family had 3/4 of land they wanted to sell. And I knew this fellow. I roomed with him at university. Anyways, he'll know who he is, and I know who he is. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. But so I gave him an opinion of value. And fairly shortly after that, I saw CLHbid had the client. The end result was nobody really knows what the actual value of property was or is going to be, except the buyers on CLHbid, open platform where people can decide amongst themselves what the value is. Yeah. My opinion of value was close to $200,000 per quarter less than what it sold for.
Wow.
By the time it was all said and done, that family probably went home with $500,000 more than if I'd have. And I can't say that if I took the listing and sold it, it might have got bid to a number above the listing price, which occasionally happens, but not very often.
So was that sort of a turning point for you were really bugging Roy, this, I really believe in this system? And
I think I signed on prior to the sale. I think I signed on July 1st, and the sale happened about mid-July or something like that. So I didn't know the answer to that. But it, the ability of CLHbid, and I'm not saying this just because I'm here now at CLHbid. I'm saying this because I observed this from the outside. I saw what was going on, and I said, this is working. Yeah. CLHbid's ability to present a property to the market for a reasonable length of time, fixed date of sale, get all of the interested parties to the table through the marketing advertising programs that are done. And then with the escalating tender system, the sellers get market value.
Yeah.
We can't give them a number, but there'll be a number on sale day, and that'll be the market value.
All right, the next thing we want to talk about, and I think we're kind of approaching the end of the podcast here, but the problems with unreserved auctions. So lack of seller control and the risk of collusion. And Roy, we've had lots of conversations around this. I've heard some pretty interesting stories. But at unreserved auction, the seller does lose control. Once the land is on the auction block, it's going regardless of price. You said that no control factor at unreserved auctions puts sellers in a vulnerable position in terms of final sale price. How does our platform differ? And we've probably covered this, but I mean...
Yeah, no, I'm not sure we have. We use a starting bid. It's not zero. Unreserved is zero. And you get 4 quarters going to unreserved auction in an area and 4 farmers at coffee together. And, have I heard of some? Yeah, totally. Have I talked to some farmers that have been part of it? Yeah. It works really good, 4 or 5 quarters, small auction house, and in a pretty tight area. And, they just agree to stay off each other's quarters. And even after online now, they'll be on the phone with each other, making sure that's you on. And they know what's going down the chute that day. They know the farmers lost control of it. Mm-hmm. So they can actually control that purchase, right? Yeah. We take that away with our starting bid, and we really take it away with our on block, because they could collude all they want, but then somebody can trump at the end, right? So again, we're really a function of, we got to fix the collusion because we knew collusion was there, right? Mm-hmm. So that's part of CLHbid.
Do you have any interesting examples or stories that you could share about collusion and how maybe a seller was negatively impacted?
No, not other than, it's not, you kind of hear, I've heard bragging about it afterwards. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, that's pretty close to stealing, right?
Yeah.
That was somebody's farm that they'd built up. But yeah, they almost are proud of controlling that market. So yeah, you basically have to have a platform that takes that away from them. But yeah.
All right, guys, before we wrap up, we've got a few questions here before we get out of here. Henry, for anyone who's still unsure about using CLHbid.com, what would you say to them?
Well, I think I mentioned it a few times. CLHbid, you get full unconflicted representation as a seller. It's straightforward. And then I talked about the process, the marketing. I guess one of the things I haven't mentioned is the huge team behind the scenes that looks after all the details and keeps everything flowing smoothly. You know, I knew I think 3 people on the team when I came to work here, and they just keep coming at me as, oh, you haven't met so and so yet.
Yep.
And it's a huge team. If people really understood what went on behind the scenes to keep everything flowing smoothly, all the documents, everything done right time, right place, it's something that people don't necessarily see up front. So that's a big thing.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks, guys, for being here. Really appreciate your time. Henry, it's been a pleasure as always. Thanks for being here, and I'm sure we'll see you in another episode. That's going to do it for another edition of the Farmland Exchange podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate your support. If you have any questions or if you have topic ideas for us to discuss, get in touch with us through email, info@CLHbid.com, or give us a phone call, 866-263-7480. If you want more information on the podcast or on CLHbid.com, check out our website, CLHbid.com/Farmland Exchange. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this has been a positive exchange for you. Take care.